We are pleased that we're here in a territory that once belonged to the great Sac and Fox Nation. Our own treaties and history show that this land was taken from them out of deceit by our U.S. government. Not a happy time for us to be thinking about that, but something we need to acknowledge. And that was in the late 1820s. Later, only a few years later, it was taken by force during the Black Hawk War of 1832. And finally, the Sac and Fox, like dozens of other tribes in the eastern half of the United States, were forcibly marched and relocated to lands foreign to them during the Indian Removal Act of 1838. For the Sac and the Fox, this meant being relocated in several different areas, including central Oklahoma, where our speaker, Chief Kay Rhoads, was raised and now presides as chief. Because we in Illinois have no federally or state-recognized tribes, we've had to reach out across state lines to engage with present-day leaders of tribal groups who trace a part of their heritage to this region. Again, these groups include the Ho-Chunk in Wisconsin and Minnesota, the Lakota and Dakota Sioux in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and the Dakotas, and the Sac and Fox and Meskwaki tribes in Oklahoma and Iowa. So, again, we welcome you to these nations' territories. And we're really honored to have among us here tonight, in addition to Chief Kay Rhoads, some leaders of other tribal nations. Those include the past president of the Ho-Chunk Nation, Cloris Lowe, and former tribal historic officer of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe and the Lakota people, Albert LeBeau. Both Albert and President Lowe will be presenting in tomorrow's symposium, so we'll hope to see you again tomorrow. I've had the honor for a good part of the last 24 hours to spend at Chief Kay Rhoads' side. We've had quite a number of great conversations. Some of us gathered for lunch today. I walked Casper Bluff Preserve with her and shared in a couple meals. We started with breakfast at Chestnut Mountain this morning. So one thing I can say that really is not in her bio, which is in the program that you all received, is that she should be bestowed an honorary doctorate in political science. I kind of had an idea, but certainly not a full idea of what she has to overcome, deal with on a daily, annual basis with the federal governments and the state governments. It's really unimaginable. It consumes a big part of her work. What she knows about the U.S. government and the congressional and the judicial systems would amaze all of you. She may be sharing some of that here with you tonight, I'm not sure. But it's appropriate we're here in a school gymnasium because the other part of Kay's bio really is all in education. She spent a quarter of a century leading schools, mostly higher education, but she started as a school teacher and then worked her way quickly up into administrative positions in higher education. And she even founded and was the president of a college in the Pacific Northwest and held that position for, I think, 7 years. So I'm not going to, Kay is our featured speaker. I just want to ask all of you to extend a very warm welcome back to Sac and Fox territory for Chief Kay Rhoads.
Well, thank you. That was such a warm and kind of humbling introduction. It is my great pleasure to be here this evening to speak with all of you. As the chief of the Sac and Fox Nation, it's always an honor to come back to our original homelands and meet the settlers that have remained here all of this time. I want to make sure, there's a lot of things I want to tell you about Sac and Fox and that of being a tribal leader, but before I begin, I do want to thank all of you for the involvement you have in the preservation of these lands and to identify, I'm trying to catch a cold here. But to preserve these lands and the native culture, I think that is extremely important. I know that as Indian people, we have worked really hard, to preserve our culture and heritage over the years, and we've done it basically on our own, within our own tribal entities. To see a group like this that has come together and put that as a priority for their area is extremely important to us, and I want to extend my utmost humble thank you for the work that you're doing and the recognition of the Sac and Fox Nation, the other Indian nations that have resided in this area, and the respect that you're giving to my ancestors and all of our Indian ancestors. So thank you. I wasn't really sure what to talk about tonight. I had talked to Steve and asked him, I said, well, what do you really want me to talk about? Because I can talk about anything. I'm an educator and now a politician, so you know how politicians are. We can talk about anything. So I did share a lot of stories today, and since Steve picked me up at the airport last night in Chicago, I told him about some of the ventures that I had been on just this week alone. But he did ask me what it was like to be a chief of a nation. And, it's hard to put into place because a lot of people don't really understand what that means. Whenever I go back to Washington or whenever I meet with governors or any of the political leaders of this country, they kind of look at me first as, oh, here's another one of our citizens, one of our taxpayers coming in. And it's important that we identify who we are as Indian leaders and let them know that we have our governments and that we govern our people within our particular tribes and our particular regions. And whenever I say that we govern them, it's a governance of trying to make life better for them, for our people, to look at what their basic needs are, to figure out, how can we make their lives a little bit better, and then all along is to kind of to preserve the culture and the heritage that each one of them have, so that they can have that identity, that Indian identity that so many have lost over the years. We were just talking about the boarding schools that were created years and years ago. And I was telling some of you about how my mother had been in one of those boarding schools, that she was a very fluent speaker of the Sauk language. And she would, when my aunt would come to our house to visit my mom, they would speak Sauk to each other. And as little kids, we would go up and we'd ask them, what are you talking about? Tell us, what did you say? And they'd say, no, you go over here and sit down. And they wouldn't tell us. Well, it's really unfortunate that that kind of thing happened and that we weren't taught our language, because the Sac and Fox now, with our 4,076 members, enrolled members, we have only 4 fluent speakers left within our nation. And that was a result of what I would call a genocide of our language brought on by the federal government. It's a fight, one of the fights that, that we have to endure on a daily basis. And as it is with just about everything else within our tribal governments. And as I was saying, whenever I go back to Washington and fight these battles, sometimes I don't like using my position to try to get information across to people. I don't want to be heavy-handed, but sometimes we don't have a choice. I can tell you one story about several years ago, and under my last administration, and I was chief of the Sac and Fox from 2004 to 2007. And then I lost the election, and then I didn't run the next time around, and then finally I'm back here again because my people asked me to come back. I was retired. I said, no, I don't want to come back. I'm retired. I like being retired. And you know, if I could retire to an area like this and do kind of the work that you guys are doing, I mean, that'd be fantastic. I mean, that's exactly the kind of life I want. So wait for me. But I did hear the call of my people, and I did run again. But I digress. Now, back into the previous administration, I had several of the tribes call me. We had our USDA program was at risk. It was a program that distributes the commodities to our people. And the Southwest region, which we're in, along with some of the pueblos in New Mexico and Texas, we had the largest population of users of the USDA program. We call it FDIPR. Federal, let's see, what is it? It's a federal distribution of Indian foods. That's what it ends up being. But we had the largest population. Our region had the most distribution centers throughout the country. We had the less returned amount, carryover monies at the end of the year because of our distributions, and the largest service population. So when I went back to Washington, the people came up and they said, some of our tribe, well, my program director and then some of the other tribes in the area, they asked me, they said, would you fight this battle for us? You know, we're getting budget cuts and we cannot sustain this. You know, we're going to, if we take the cuts that they're giving us this year, we're going to, lose a huge number of dollars that we're going to be unable to serve most of our populations. Is there something you can do? I said, well, I don't know. I said, I'll go back and see. So I had scheduled a meeting with the Undersecretary of Agriculture. And if you look at the organizational chart, I mean, he's way up here at the top. And so we went in to meet with him, and we were late because I don't know if any of you are familiar with the buildings in Washington, D.C., but the U.S. Department of Agriculture takes up about 3 blocks. And so when the cab dropped us off, they dropped us off on the wrong side, so we had to go all the way around the building in order to get in and get through security and everything. So we were about 10 minutes late. And I walked in, and they said, well, who are you here to meet? And I mentioned the name. And so we went on in, and they brought us into this huge boardroom. And the table was almost as long as the stage. And at the one end, there were all of these government officials sitting down here. And then here's the secretary sitting up here at the front. And so I sat up next to him along with one of my staff members. And we started talking, and I asked him, I said, well, why is the Southwest region receiving budget cuts to this extent? And explained to him, about, the successes that we've had in our numbers and so on. And he goes, well, everybody has to go through cuts. And he said, everything is based upon a formula, and it just happens that this year you're going to have to get a cut. And he said, didn't you get an increase last year? And I said, yeah. I said, but we had an increase in our population, so of course we should have had an increase. And he goes, well, it doesn't work like that. And so, I mean, I'm kind of puzzled at this whole thing. And I said, well, can you explain that to me? And, well, first, before we even started that conversation, he told me, he goes, well, you're late. And so I explained to him why we were late. And he goes, I've got a busy schedule. And he said, he said, what do you want? It wasn't what can I help you with, it's what do you want? And so, I immediately jumped into what I wanted. And so he said, he started talking about this formula, and I said, okay, I understand that. I understand it operates with a formula. I said, can you explain the formula? He said, well, it's a very complicated formula. And I said, you're absolutely right. You are absolutely right. I said, it's so complicated that your staff can't explain it. He goes, which one of my staff? And he looked down at the end of the table, and he was just so angry. He goes, which one of them? Which one of them can't explain it? And every one of them, I mean, you could just see this fear come over all their faces. And he said, who'd you talk to? And I said, I didn't talk to any of them. And I said, and it doesn't really make any difference. I said, I'm asking you to explain it. You're the head of the department. You explain it. And he said, well, it's a rather antiquated system. I said, we're in the 21st century. We're in the age of computers. There is no reason to have an antiquated system in this day and age. And that is not an acceptable answer for me. He goes, well, what are you going to do? You going to run over to Capitol Hill? I mean, this is just his tone. What are you going to do? Run over to Capitol Hill and talk to your congressional leaders and have them send me a letter telling me to give you more money? I said, no. I'm not going to do that because I already did that this morning. And so, yes, you are going to get those letters. And I said, so what are you going to do to accommodate me? And he goes, well, he said, we tried to work with these Indians for a long time, and he said, they won't work together. He said, they won't cooperate at all. And he said, we tried to look at these formulas, and they just won't do anything. And I said, how did you talk to them? And he goes, well, he said, we asked them to come together, and they wouldn't do anything. And he said, if you want this changed and everything, he said, then you go to this meeting in South Dakota, which is their annual conference, and I think it's in the following month. And he said, talk to them, and he said, and if you can get them all to come to agreement, he said, we'll change the formula. I said, okay. So I did. I went there, I talked to them. We organized a committee from the different regions. In about a year and a half later, we all came to an agreement, took it back there, and they had to establish a new formula so that it's equitable throughout the Indian country now. It's still not enough money, but still, I mean, it's an equitable formula now. And the other good part was that he was removed from that office and sent as an ambassador to somewhere in Africa. So that was the other good part of the story. So as a tribal leader, that's kind of the things that we have to do. It's not just about how I serve my individual tribal members, but the message that we send out to all the tribes, because what we do as Sac and Fox is going to impact what every other tribe in the country. If we do something that is precedent-setting, these cases that are coming before the Supreme Court right now, we have to pick and choose our battles as to what case are we going to bring forward? Because if we sue some department or agency or whatever over an issue that we feel very strongly about, we've got to make sure that we have everything in place that we can win that battle. We've got to think way ahead to make sure that, if it ever got to the Supreme Court, would we be able to defend that position? Because if we can't defend that position for our tribe, let's say the Sac and Fox Nation, and we fail and the Supreme Court makes a decision, it impacts every tribe throughout the country. So whatever we do as leaders, Indian leaders, it's not just for our immediate tribe, it's for all Indian people, because we have a commitment to them. And we're constantly under attack. We're under attack every single day regarding every program that we have. We, as I said, we look at the needs of our people, and the programs that come available. We've asked for the ability to govern ourselves. And in the 90s, we had a law that was passed that allowed, that the federal government recognized that tribes could govern themselves. It's the Indian Self-Determination Act, an Education Act, and we call it ISDA. That act was passed, and it granted the tribes the authority to take over their government programs, the federal government programs, and operate them within their tribes. So any of the programs that the Bureau of Indian Affairs, because that was the big complaint that everybody had, the Bureau of Indian Affairs doesn't do anything for the tribes. And we can still say that to some extent. But we said that we could do it better. So when we started looking at what programs could we do, we said we want to be able to compact those programs, that rather than the federal government, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, taking this money and saying, okay, you will implement this program and this program and this program, and then write all these federal regulations that says that you will abide by this, 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 and this is how you're going to carry out your program. We wanted more flexibility because, again, as laws are written, and especially for the tribes, what's written that might be good for me, a Sac and Fox, may not be good for our Ho-Chunk people because we live in different areas of the country. Our needs are a little bit different. And so what's good for the Plains people isn't good for the coastal people necessarily. I've just been working with the Department of Transportation to get to establish an Office of Self-Governance in that agency. And that was where I was early this week, negotiating with a federal team to get these laws written. And as we were going through the discussion, they were saying, well, you can only, if we set this office up, you can only take these programs where there's Indian money. I said, no, that's not what self-governance is. Self-governance is to look at all your programs under the Department of Transportation and see which ones actually apply to tribes so that we can take that portion over and that we can administer that particular program within our reservation areas for our people. That was a concept that was extremely difficult for them to understand. And it's a concept that's difficult for every federal agency to understand because it's threatening to them. It's threatening from the fact that we're going to lose control of these Indians. We're going to lose control of our monies. And we can't be guaranteed, if we issue money to these tribes, then we're responsible for these funds, and they're going to go out there and they're going to mess everything up, and then we're going to get blamed for it. This federal agency is going to get blamed for it. Well, that hasn't worked. And as I said, in the 90s, when ISDA came into place, we had tribes that took over the BIA programs, the Bureau of Indian Affairs programs, and then later we took over Indian Health Service programs. If you go back and look at the successes that those agencies, those tribes have had now, has been tremendous. We have better healthcare systems within our areas because now we can implement programs specifically for our particular need. If we have a high population that are susceptible to diabetes, then we're going to put a lot of our money into that. If we have a high population of opioid overdose and use, then we're going to focus on that. We're going to put a bunch of monies into that. But it depends upon the region of the country. So again, what's prevalent in my area may not be prevalent to some of the tribes up in the Pacific Northwest or the eastern region, the Florida areas. We're all different. Just like citizens of Illinois, you're different than some of the needs of people from the other states. It's not any different. But the federal government has a very difficult time understanding that, and we have been working hard to educate them on these topics. So it's, to say that you run a government, it's a government within a government, and that is a real broad concept to understand, because everybody asks, well, how can you have a nation within a nation? Well, it's no different than having a state within a nation, because you still have the internal governments of the states that operate, and that's kind of the same way that we do with the tribes. We have our own policies, our own procedures, we have all of our own laws. The Sac and Fox Nation was one of the tribes that exercised self-determination and self-governance many years ago. We had, and I know you guys are all familiar with the name Jim Thorpe. Jim Thorpe was a Sac and Fox member, and his son, Jack Thorpe, was a chief. And several years ago, whenever we decided that we were going to fight the federal government on our rights to govern our people. And of course, it was like, no, you're not going to do that. We had car tags. We issued car tags to some of our tribal members, and it had the Sac and Fox logo on them. And so we said, we're going to tax our Sac and Fox people, and that's going to be our revenue generator. Just as municipalities tax your citizens, just as the state taxes you as a citizen to generate money for their governments. We didn't have that right, according to the federal government. Even though we were our own government, we were a nation. We did not, the federal government would not recognize that as a right to Indian people. And the state of Oklahoma was just completely adamant that you're not going to do that. So I remember Jack told us a story about it, and he was so animated with the stories that he would tell. But we had friends that was on the police force, and that was working with the law enforcement's office in Oklahoma City as well, the regional area. And so they called Chief Thorpe and told him, you need to know that there's going to be an arrest made this week. And if you guys are seen driving through the town of Prague, which we all had to go through, if we lived in the southern part of our jurisdiction, we had to go through the city of Prague. There wasn't really any way around it. And they said, you're going to be arrested if you have those tags on your car. So he said, okay. So he took the treasurer, his name was Truman Carter, and Truman Carter's an attorney also, an Indian attorney, and had studied Indian law very extensively. So he took him with him, and they had one other person in the car, or the second chief, and they were driving through town. Well, they had told our tribal administrator that this is what's going to happen. You take a car and go ahead and park it on the next street over, because we're going to get arrested, and they'll either take us into custody or they'll confiscate our vehicle. And so that's exactly what happened. They confiscated their vehicle. They pulled them over, confiscated their vehicle, said that they were not allowed to drive on state roads with Sac and Fox tags. That if they were going to drive their vehicles on a state road, they had to have Oklahoma tags. And so they got out of the car. They impounded our tribal vehicle, of all things, and our three elected officials took off on foot, walking around the block, got in the car, drove to Oklahoma City, filed with the U.S. District Attorney a lawsuit against the state of Oklahoma. We went through the battles and everything, and we were represented by our Attorney General, Greg Bigler, and our tribal attorney, William Rice. We call him Bill Rice. 3 Indian attorneys, all 3 Indian attorneys. Truman being from the Sac and Fox. Bill Rice was a United Katuah band of Cherokees. And Greg Bigler was a Uchee Valley. He was part of the Muskogee Creek branch. So they filed a suit, and they went to court in Oklahoma. Well, we won in Oklahoma at the district court. They appealed it, went to the appellate court. We won in the appellate court, so it went to the Supreme Court. And Oklahoma just knew they were going to win in the Supreme Court. So whenever they went to the Supreme Court, this was the first time, and probably the last time, I can't be absolutely certain, but I know this was the first time that the Supreme Court had been approached by 3 Indian attorneys. Now, we've had Indian attorneys before the Supreme Court since that time, but usually they are in the second or maybe third chair and not necessarily the lead attorney. And then there's usually non-Indian attorneys that accompany our Indian attorneys. But this time there was 3 Indian attorneys. And if any of you had met Bill Rice, he had this long, slow, drawn-out speech. And it's like, when you're before the Supreme Court, I think you only get 3 minutes to talk. It's like, oh my God, he's never going to get through. But they said the trick to the Supreme Court to get a little bit more time is to provide enough information that they will ask you questions. And then, you get a little bit more time. And that's exactly what Bill did. But we won that case. And so that gave the tribes throughout the United States the right to tax their people and to have car tags. And so when you come to Oklahoma in particular, there's a few tribes outside of the state of Oklahoma that have car tags, but in Oklahoma you'll see all kinds of car tags of every single tribe. And we've got 39 tribes in Oklahoma, and they all have their own individual car tags. So the state of Oklahoma has always been angry with us as a result. But, but that's an exercise in self-governance. And because it was a way for us to collect some tax dollars in order to help support our governments. And it's no different than what any other municipality or county or city does. So we've struggled with self-governance for quite some time. We ended up taking over Indian Health Service, and as I said, and operating our health care programs this way. We've still got some tribes, especially in the Great Plains area, that are experiencing a lot of health care problems because of their Indian hospitals. They can't attract Indian doctors there. It's still operated by the government. They have all sorts of red tape in order to go through it. And I think the tribes are finally starting to see that maybe we should take over these Indian health facilities. And so I think that's going to come about. But of the I think 563 tribes that are recognized in the state of, throughout the United States. We've got about 326 tribes now have entered into the self-governance programs so that they now receive their monies directly from the federal agency, directly to them. So there's no longer this administrative fee. The middleman that takes a huge portion of the money, all of it comes to us now. And we get it in one lump sum. So when we get that money, then we can put it in the bank. We can draw the interest on it and help our people a little bit more. So it's, it's just kind of basic common sense to operate this way. But yet we've had so much resistance for years and years in trying to operate this kind of program because there was uncertainty about are these Indians capable of managing their own destiny. And the term is self-determination, and we were laughing about it as we were in negotiations this week. And I said, the Department of Transportation really thinks that we're going to do self-termination if we take over this money. And I said they certainly don't know, what we've done. But economic development has started booming within Indian country, and some tribes do it much better than others. The Chickasaw Nation in Oklahoma is one of those that, they own a lot of Oklahoma City now. They own the baseball park. They have recreational areas that they own. The governor always asks, she asked Governor Anatubby, who's the chief of the Chickasaws. She always asks him, well, what is your opinion? And she and I went head to head one day because she did that. And I said, excuse me, he's Chickasaw. He's not speaking on behalf of the Sac and Fox Nation or any of these other tribes in here. And I said, so thank you, Governor Anatubby. We appreciate your opinion, but that's for your own people. You're not speaking for us. And they want to write laws that are specific to particular tribes and omit, again, like I said, the interest of everybody else. And the governor understands it. Governor Anatubby understands that, but our state governor doesn't seem to understand. Thank goodness she only has a few more months to go. So, but anyhow, let me see, what else can I tell you about this? As a woman chief, I think the story I just told you about the undersecretary, I think part of that was because I was a woman. It had nothing to do with my position. And that was one of the things that I told him as I told him that, we were going to send the money over. But he was very belittling and talking down to me during that conversation. And I had to stop him at one point. And I said, wait a minute. I said, let's get something straight, because he was trying to dictate to me. I said, you're here. And I said, aren't you a presidential appointee? And he goes, yes. And I said, so the president's up here, and then you have a secretary, and then you're the undersecretary. Is that correct? And he goes, yeah. I said, so you're 3 steps down from the president? Yes. I said, well, I'm the chief of a nation. Me and the president are up here. I said, so don't be talking down to me. And that's when his attitude changed, and that's when he asked for help. So as I said, I don't always like to pull rank, but occasionally you have to. And that's kind of what was happening with negotiations this week. There's a lot of things that the Sac and Fox Nation has done, since we left Illinois. Our hearts have always been here. And we know that our ancestors are here. So there's been this tug constantly to come back up here. And that's why it's so heartfelt that you have invited me as the leader of the Sac and Fox Nation to be here to talk with you and to bring our nation back into this area. There's a lot of history, as you know, about the Sac and Fox people here, and we do have an interest in being here. That I was reading the autobiography of Black Hawk, and as he was talking about how he wanted to come back to his homelands because he had a lot of his family and friends that he had buried here. And these mounds that you're talking about, these are the places where we buried our people. And we would go there to pray and pray for them and ask them, our ancestors, to help give us guidance so that we could move forward and make the correct decisions as we go through day-to-day lives. So it's extremely important that we preserve these mounds that you guys have so graciously worked diligently to preserve. It's not just a cemetery, but as I said, it's there where we call upon our ancestors and ask them for the direction. And the prayers those quiet places that we established in those, as we created those mounds, was because it was a secluded area, that we could make sure that our people rested in peace, and that we knew where they were, and we could go back and visit and pray with them. So that's one of the reasons we need to be back up here. That we need to come back and honor our ancestors just as you honor your people. That's getting heavy now, so we need to liven this up a little bit. They told you about kind of my background, and I was in education for a long time, and I shared with some of the people today at lunchtime about the college, the Indian college that I created in Washington State. It was a different kind of college. It wasn't the typical college that you know of, but it was truly an Indian college. It wasn't just that we were going to go in here and teach somebody how to bead or to weave, and that type of art type of culture, but it was more about what could be done to teach everybody about what the tribes were really about. So whenever I set the college up, I had been working with Pierce College, which is the second largest community college system in the state of Washington. I served there as the dean of students and then the institutional dean of something. I don't remember what it was, some research. He gave me some flamboyant name. It boiled down to that I was the affirmative action officer, I think, to keep people from being walked all over, and our students. But anyhow, so when I left there, that was, I looked at the formation of the college and had worked with the tribes. And so as we set up the curriculum, we knew that I didn't want students to come in and pay a tuition and then have to earn credits that were not transferable to a university. I wanted our people to make sure that if they decided that they wanted to pursue a bachelor's degree, because we were only giving associate's degrees, community 2-year degrees, that they would be easily transitioned into the universities. So I took the curriculum from Pierce College and asked Pierce College if they would be our sister institution and allow us to run our credits through them. And so they agreed. So we set up an agreement with them to do that. But when I took their learning objectives, I gave it to my instructors and I said, now, you take this is what you're going to teach to, but there's a different twist. You're going to have to teach Native American culture. And how do you impose Native American culture into this subject area? And they were just kind of, oh my God, how are we going to do that? Well, with English, it was really easy, the English classes. We could do it in the writings, we could do it in the stories that we read and so on. But how are you going to do that in psychology? How are you going to do that in biology? How are you going to do it in math? And I had, so I just told them, I said, you can figure this out. I said, you just infuse the culture in there. So my staff were extremely creative. So with the psychology class, we taught the theories of, all the different psychologists. We talked about, why would this particular theory work in your tribe? How would it work? Would it? And they'd sit there and they'd kind of think about it. Would it work in yours? Would it work in yours? And all of a sudden, we had 39 tribes in our classes at Medicine Creek, because we were an urban college, so we had a lot of migration into the city. And as they went through and they talked about, that would work with ours, but it wouldn't work over here, and then they explained why. And so because of that, they were able to understand that psychological theory. They were able to interpret it, and it became what we called applied academics, that whenever it came time to go in and take the test, and they said, which theory is this? They knew immediately which it was because they could relate to that from a personal standpoint. And at the same time, they were learning to respect the other tribal members that were in that class. And that's what education is about, teaching you respect of each other. The question came up with math. Well, how are you going to do this in math? And we had a brilliant instructor from there. He was a graduate of Harvard. And I'll have to tell you about him in a minute. But he said, well, I think I know how to do this. And in the Northwest, of course, they were fishermen. So he would write the algebraic formula upon the board, and then he would assign positions. Like, if you were going to, if you have to catch this many pounds of fish, and you have to go out into the Puget Sound, how many feet of net are you going to have? And what is the weight of that net that you're going to have in order to bring in that haul? And what's the depths that you're going to have to go down in order to catch that? They figured all of that in there. And those students, it was like, wow, the light went on. And they were able to figure out those algebraic formulas right away. It was just absolutely fascinating how creative he was in order to bring that together. But it was all based, again, upon cultural values and cultural experience that he was able to generate that information. We were so successful with that program. Whenever I graduated my first class, we had 3 students that graduated. And I was so proud of them that it was three girls, and they were all going to be science majors. One was going into environmental science, and the other one was going into physical therapy, and the third was going into molecular cell biology. 2 of those 3 had been labeled special ed students all the way through, from first grade all the way through high school. They were told that they shouldn't go to college because they couldn't succeed. And those were my valedictorian and salutatorian, those 2. So it worked. And, whenever we started getting the grades, and I started looking over the transcripts and everything, and, to certify that they had completed all the requirements, I looked at their grades and I thought, I wonder, and this was their last quarter there. We were based on a quarter system. I thought, maybe we're too easy. Maybe it's too easy for them. Well, the last class they had to take was a advanced calculus class. And we just didn't have the money to do it because it's all based upon, how many students you get in a class and how much money you generate so that you could pay for the instructor. And our instructors were working pretty cheap as it was. So I said, you're going to have to go over to Pierce College, the community college, and take the course over there. And they said, we don't want to do that. And I said, no. I said, in order for you to finish your degree, you have to do this. So they said, okay. So they went into the class. Not only did they pass the class, but they set the curve in the class for an advanced calculus. So at that point, when they came back and they told me that, and one of the instructors called me and told me about it, I knew we were doing something right. So, and unfortunately, that college isn't together after I left, and they didn't keep it open too much longer after that. But that was pretty sad. The instructor that I was telling you about, that was a graduate of Harvard. We were trying to go through our accreditation process because we wanted to get our federal dollars and everything, and he said, I said, you have to have all of your degrees in here. We have to have copies of your degrees in order to meet the requirements for accreditation. And I said, so bring forth your degrees. And he looked at me, he said, I don't have a degree. I don't have a bachelor's degree. I said, you don't have a bachelor's degree? And I said, or a master's either? He goes, no. I said, but you're sitting here with a PhD. I said, how did you get a PhD? And he said, because I went to Harvard. And he said, They didn't require you to have a bachelor's degree or a master's degree to get into their PhD programs. You just had to take the test to see if you were capable of doing it, and if you could, they let you in. I thought, yes, yes. So, of course, the light went on. Why am I fighting with the federal government to get money for my college whenever the most prestigious college in the United States is sitting over here letting people in that don't have to have degrees and granting them degrees? And so I went back to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Department of Education, started talking to them, and of course they told me, we're not going to give you any money unless you're accredited. And I explained to them, I said, well, in order to be accredited, you have to have financial stability. We can't have financial stability, so even if I got donors, you know, we can't guarantee that every year that donation is going to come in. So we need stable monies coming in, and that's what the Bureau is supposed to be for. No, you have to be accredited. So I told them, I said, well, if I set up a college that is just a real prestigious college, let's say if I set up a college like Harvard, and would you fund me then? And if they said, if you set it up just like Harvard and ran it like Harvard, I said, yeah. I said, would you give me the money then? And they said, yeah, but you still have to be accredited. I said, no. I said, you just told me that if I set the college up like Harvard, you'd give me the money. Harvard has never been accredited, and it still isn't accredited today. And I said, so you just told me that if I set it up like Harvard, that you'd give me my money. I'm setting it up like Harvard. They're not accredited. They never have been. And I said, so you have to give me my money. And I gave the story to my senators, and they did a colloquy on the Senate floor, and we got the money. So, and now the Bureau of Indian Affairs has set aside money for planning for tribal colleges. So that money's available now for them, so they don't have to fight the battle that I did. So those are the things that we do. I wasn't the tribal leader at the time, but those are the kind of battles that we have to fight on a daily basis. And we could pick any one of our programs and look at the fights that we're having. We have a juvenile detention center that a 60-bed facility. We're actually the regional juvenile detention center for 6 surrounding states. And with a 60-bed facility, state-of-the-art facility, maximum security, we have maybe 12 juveniles a month. That's it. Yet, when we checked the state system, they had over 95 Indian youth that was incarcerated in state juvenile detention centers. I said, that's not acceptable. They need to be here with us, because at our facility, we work with them on cultural values. We help them through the meditation. We take them through the sweat lodge. We work with them on teaching them their traditions and giving them their pride of being natives. I said, nobody is proud of the fact that they're locked up behind bars, but they certainly can identify with who they are and have some pride within themselves about the fact that they are native people. But you can't do that if you're locked up in a state system. And so they said, well, talk to the tribes and make sure that the tribes send the people up there. But I said, it's a problem, and we're still battling this. I said, it's a problem because you don't give any of the tribes enough money to incarcerate their juveniles. And so what happens is they allow them to go through the state system because they know that they're going to have to be imprisoned. So the state system takes over the case, and some of the times we end up losing those kids completely, because once they get removed from there, then they're placed into foster homes, and then sometimes adopted, and they lose their identity completely. So we're working now to try to prevent that from happening. I've been fighting that battle now for about the last 4 years, ever since I came back into to this office. And I had started that battle under my last administration, and then I walked away. But But that fight is looming now, and we have to continue to see what we can do in order to bring justice to those kids and to help them to learn a better way of life. That, you know, I mean, we all know that prison systems aren't the best place for our people because they go in there and they learn to be better prisoners, better criminals, and that's all they teach them. But our juvenile detention center isn't like that. And so we really need to work to, you know, get our Indian youth there at that facility and work through them. And believe me, I mean, some of those kids that come in there, I mean, they need to be locked up. I mean, we hate seeing anybody locked up, but of the 12 kids that was there last month, 2 of them were murderers and had some pretty gruesome murders that occurred. So they definitely need to be locked up, but at the same time, they don't need to be in a general population where they can learn from everybody else. That cultural issues needs to be there. So as I said, we are, I think there's 9 Indian juvenile detention centers in the United States, and every one of us are struggling like that because the government will not give us the monies to pay for the operation of that facility. They give us the money for staffing, but for the maintenance of the facility itself, that becomes the burden of the tribe. And so it's a tough road to haul. But that was one of the programs that we had set up. The other thing that Sac and Fox has done as a self-governance tribe, there was a lot of firsts for the Sac and Fox in Oklahoma. And we were the first tribe to set up our police department. We were the first ones to set up a tribal court system. And as we set up the tribal court system, we wrote our code of laws. And the other tribes in Oklahoma started realizing that, well, we can do the same thing. And so they adopted our laws. In fact, one of the tribes, I was visiting them one day, and they pulled out their code of laws, and we was flipping through it. And I said, hey, this says right here, Sac and Fox Nation. I said, you're not Sac and Fox. They said, oh, we missed that page. But I mean, we've just come such a long way with our tribal courts. And that's another issue that we have to fight on a continuing basis, is that it's questionable about when we do business, we say we're not going to relinquish our sovereignty if we sign a contract with somebody, so that if we have a dispute, then it's going to be tried in tribal court. Well, a lot of businesses don't want to do that because they think, oh, well, no, you know, it's a kangaroo court, it's their assumption. And it's not. And I tell them that. I said, you need to realize that the judges that we have appointed are the same, they have the same legal background that your judges do in all of your municipal courts. That they've gone through the same university systems that your people have gone through, that your judges have gone through. I said, the only difference is that your judges learn, here in Oklahoma, your judges learn Oklahoma law. Our judges learn Oklahoma law, federal law, and Sac and Fox laws. I said, so when you start looking at who has the credibility and the most knowledge about being a judge, yours over here that only knows Oklahoma and federal law, or this one over here who knows federal laws, Oklahoma laws, and state laws, who would you choose to be in front of? So they've kind of backed off to some extent on that. We had our first jury trial in probably about 50 years. And this was before we even had courts, that they had mock jury trials way back when. But we had our first jury trial in August. And the judges came out and they were just beside themselves. They said, we sent out, our court clerk sent out notices to be on the jury to 300 people. And And then they went through and they sifted through some of us and said, oh, well, you can't be on there because you're the chief of the tribe, so you can't, you're not impartial, so you can't be on there. So they took me off, and then they took several other people off, because of specific reasons. But the day that they came to do the jury selection, they subpoenaed 150 people, thinking that, oh my gosh, we're going to have a hard time getting a jury. 143 people showed up for jury duty. Even one that had just gotten out of the hospital the day before because she had knee replacement surgery, and she was there. And I said, don't make her stand in line, put her up here. I said, give her a seat. And I went back and I talked to the clerk, and I said, go in and talk to the judge and ask if he'll excuse her. She just had surgery, and so of course they did. But he came out, and after the trial was over and everything, they said, every court in the country should come in here and ask for a jury trial before the Sac and Fox Nation, because no court has ever asked for jury summons and had that percentage of people show up. And so I was asking people, I said, well, why did you show up? I said, they said, because it said in the letter that if we didn't show up, we could be thrown in jail. So no, we're coming. But it was a good case, and my daughter was one of the people that was. She came in, and we both had our letters, and so they told me immediately. They said, no, you can't serve, and I said, okay, fine. And she said, she's not. Mom, she don't say anything. She said, because I think I really want to be on this jury. And she said, and don't mess it up for me. So, we came in and we were trying to find a parking place. Well, all the parking spots were gone. I said, we'll go park in the back. I said, that's the commander-in-chief of the police department. I can park in the back. So I parked in the back, and I came through the back door and brought her through. And she goes, see, that's what I'm saying. Right now, she said, you already let people know that I'm your daughter, and I'm getting special privileges by coming in the back door. They're probably not going to select me. So it ended up, she ended up getting selected. There was, I think they were selecting 10 people, and when they started calling out the names, there was a few people that they couldn't serve, and so she was the final alternate, and they said, well, you get to serve. So she was all excited, and she came out, and she goes, I got on the jury, and so we went to lunch and everything, and then they had to be back at 1 o'clock, and she goes, Mom, she said, I think that I want to be the head of the jury. I said, Krishna, you don't want to do that. And she goes, yeah, I do. And I said, well, it has to be elected. And she said, well, I'm going to go ahead here and talk to this one and that one. She said, I know I can get elected. And she did. So she was chair. But that was our first jury trial, and it went really well. And so, but like I said, Oklahoma, Sac and Fox has been first in a lot of things throughout Indian country, and we were the first ones, as I said, to sign the IHS Compact Agreement for Self-Governance. We were one of the first tribes to sign the compact with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and as a result, I serve on the National Committee for the Self-Governance Board because of our position as being one of the first tribes to enter into self-governance here in the United States. So I'm going to stop and give you some time to ask some questions about things. I mean, there's just so many things that we could talk about as far as, what it's like to be a chief, but you can tell by my stories that there's a lot of things that we have to know and be involved in, and by no means am I an expert in any one of those areas, but thank goodness that we have some excellent attorneys that are great advisors that work with me on a regular basis. So I will open it up for questions now. Does anyone have any questions for me? Yes?
Do you have any programs for promotion teaching language?
Okay, yeah, I will. I'll repeat it. Yeah, he asked, do we have any promotions or programs to teach the language? And the answer is yes. We have, we got some federal grants several years ago, and we have developed CDs, we have flash drives, we have a lot of recorded documentation, and we were fortunate enough to record a lot of the elders before they passed. And we have a dictionary, a Sac and Fox dictionary. We actually have a website that is that you can go on the site, and I think it's just Talk Sauk, S-A-U-K, and it'll teach you some of the Sauk language, Sauk words. We have a young lady, she's in her early 30s, or maybe even her late 20s, I'm not really sure, she's very young. But when we first started the program, she took the classes and everything and has become an almost fluent speaker. So she's teaching the classes now, and but there's a lot of curriculum that we've put in place and different medias that we've put in place in order to teach the language. We just opened our early childhood development program, our Head Start program, 2 weeks ago, and the language program is going to be going in there twice a week to teach our 3 to 5 year olds Sauk language. And then we also have classes that we teach at the public schools, and then we have other classes that we teach after school hours for people to come in and learn. And so we participate in language competitions every spring. We have a language competition at the University of Oklahoma, and this year we took second. So the language is going to survive. I'm convinced that it is going to survive. Unfortunately, I'm not a speaker, but I know a few words, but I can't say them. No. That's the first things that they always learn. But yes, our language is being revived. Thank you for that question. Other questions? Yes. Yes, you. We have a case right now. The Citizen Potawatomi Nation has done that. They opened up a grocery store, and the state of Oklahoma is suing them because they said that they're not paying state taxes. And it's like, it's on trust land. You don't have any authority to come in here and tell us that you're going to tax us. They said, well, what about the non-Indian people that are shopping there? It's like, it doesn't make any difference. We collect the taxes there at the tribe, and distribute it for our use. So, I don't know, did everybody hear the question? Can we open up a grocery store? The answer is yes, and that's another thing that Sac and Fox did first, is that we set up a corporation, licensing for corporations within the Sac and Fox Nation. And just like Delaware and Nevada do, corporations can sign under the Sac and Fox Nation so that they get those tax breaks. But different programs can set up business on the tribe, within tribal lands. If it's trust land that is non-taxable land, that's better, because then we have full jurisdiction over it. If it's within our reservation boundaries, that may not be what we call non-trust, which is the taxable lands, then it can be subjected to the state tax unless it's run through the corporation under the Sac and Fox Nation. So yes, it's tax breaks. Yes, we use our tribal government standards for all of our programs. In fact, 3 weeks ago, I got into a fight with the state of Oklahoma. I'm always fighting with somebody. But the child care center that I was just telling you about, we closed down one of our child care centers that was located in a different area, and actually outside of our tribal jurisdiction, because it was condemned. And so I said, well, let's put one up here at Sac and Fox. So we gave them the land to put up the facility. And so we did that. And then we brought in, we hired an engineer to serve as an inspector to make sure that we went through all of the safety standards. And he's state licensed because he does business with a lot of different agencies throughout. And so he went through with us on all of these standards. Well, then when it came time to finally open, the state of Oklahoma came in and said, no, you're going to have to, they sent their social worker in or their caseworker in and said, here's a checklist and you have to do this, 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 and this. And so we said, okay, we wanted to be good stewards, so we said, all right. She came in again and said, well, now you got to do this, 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 and this. And it's like, okay. So our director is just in this absolute panic because we got a call from Washington, D.C.'s headquarters saying that if you don't have your enrollment into the federal office by, I think it was the end of October, then you're going to lose part of your funding. And it was going to be a huge part of our funding. And so we were frantic, trying to get this facility opened. And so then the woman comes back in the third time, and then she sets up another set of criteria. I said, I'm done. I'm done. I'm not playing this game anymore. And I said, who is this person? Our director called me, and she said, show me what the problems were. I said, who's this person? So she told me. And I said, who's her boss? And she told me that one. I said, who's that one's boss? She told me. I said, is that as high as it goes? And they said, yeah. Okay. So I get on the phone, and I called them, talked to our policy analyst, who's also an attorney, and I said, give me the federal law that says that we don't have to abide by state laws in this situation. So she pulled it out, and it was CFR or something. Anyhow, so I'm sitting here with this paper in front of me on the phone with this lady, and I told her what I just told you about this caseworker coming out there and putting all of these limitations on us. And I said, I'm not going to play the game anymore. I said, I've got to open up this facility. And I said, with or without you. And she said, well, we're not going to license you. And I said, I don't need your license. We're on tribal land. We are our own government. And I said, we were just trying to be a cooperative with you and work as partners. I said, but you want to be partners? I said, that's okay with me. I said, I'm opening up. I said, Monday morning, I said, we're going to have kids running around on the playground and in the classrooms. And she said, well, what about the fire marshal? And I said, what about the fire marshal? I said, you ask him. I said, because he had called and said that they said, you need to go out to Sac and Fox and look at this facility. And he told them, I can't go out onto Sac and Fox land unless they invite me. And so I said, whenever he told your caseworker that, I said, shouldn't that have been a clue at that point that you don't have any jurisdiction over us? So she said, well, I'm really sorry. And she said, but if whatever credentials and guidelines that you have out there, she said, we'll comply with those. So we opened that following Monday. I called my director and I said, I talked to the state office, forget it, we're opening up, and start calling the parents and tell them that we'll have their kids there Monday morning. And they did. So they got to go trick-or-treating in our offices this week. It's like, yay. So does that answer your question? Yeah, so we have our own laws. We deal, the question was, do we deal with the Bureau of Affairs very much anymore? We still work with the Bureau of Indian Affairs because there's some programs that they will not allow us to take over. And one of those, and this is another fight that I'm in, I just feel like everything that they do, I'm fighting with them. But one of it is to put land into trust. It says in federal regulations that it's at the discretion of the secretary to put land into trust. And we had a charter written in 2006, and it was signed by the Assistant Secretary of Interior that granted Sac and Fox the right to make the determination of whether or not we wanted a particular parcel of land in trust. And we are still fighting today with the Bureau of Indian Affairs out of Anadarko on this issue because they said it's not a valid charter. And it says in the charter itself that this charter can only be revoked by an act of Congress. And it grants us that authority. And the Bureau of Indian Affairs is saying, no, we're not going to acknowledge it. And I asked them why, and they said that because it wasn't valid because the assistant secretary was going to be leaving the office, and he was leaving that office in a matter of days, and he just signed it because he was getting ready to leave that office. It was a new administration was coming in. I said, that's the most bizarre thing I've ever heard. I said, so you're telling me, I said, now that assistant secretary is assigned by the president, so he's giving that assistant secretary authority in his behalf to sign these agreements. Isn't that the way that's written? He said, yes. And I said, so you're telling me that when the president signs a pardon for somebody at 4 o'clock, at 4:30 or 4:59, as he's walking out the door, that's not valid? That pardon isn't valid? He said, well, that's different. I said, no, it's not. No, it's not. and he goes, well, he said, it's because we weren't invited to the table for the negotiations. I said, so you're mad because we didn't ask you to come in here and work with us on this? And he goes, well, you should have invited us in for negotiations. And I said, well, I think that the past 50 years of trying to negotiate with you on putting land into trust and you not hearing us, I think you've been invited to the table more than once. And we didn't need to invite you anymore. That's why we went above your head and got this signed. And I said, so now I'm going to charge you with insubordination. I said, because your boss told you to implement this program and you haven't done it. And I said, so aren't you insubordinate as a federal employee? He goes, you need to talk to our solicitor. And that was the end of the discussion. So that's where we are now. So, so we deal with the Bureau on some issues. We have issues right now about probate cases, and that was another area that they said that we didn't have any authority on, but yet the Bureau of Indian Affairs, it's not consistent from one region to another, because I know that tribes some of the tribes in the Pacific Northwest handle their probate. California tribes handle their probate issues, but they don't want us to handle ours. And we don't even have an administrative law judge in Oklahoma anymore, because we had to share it with Albuquerque. And because there was some political issue that has come up, the Bureau of Indian Affairs has stopped hearing probates altogether. So all of this land that people are trying to put into trust or to take out of trust can't be determined, because we don't know who the landowners are until these probate cases are settled. And the federal government now is saying, no, we're not going to hear any more probate cases because some little detail that they've got to work out back there. So that's why we ask to be self-governance tribes. Let us do it. We can cut through the red tape, we can get the business taken care of, and we can move on. So thank you.
Let's thank Kay again.
Thank you so much.